Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee. I understand that we have some technical issues, so we're not being live streamed tonight, but this meeting will potentially be put on later on as a hard recording, if it works. Apologies. I'm aware of apologies from Councillor Shepherd and Councillor Tromans. Do we have any other apologies? Councillor Kennett.
Apologies for Councillor Beetham.
Item number 3, minutes. Has everybody had a chance to read the minutes of the last meeting, and is everybody happy if I sign them? Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Kovacevic. Item number 4, declarations of interest. Do any members other than myself have any interests which are not included on the schedule? I need to declare then that my employer has changed and I'm now employed by Vinci Construction Major Projects. I shall get that forwarded across and get that changed on the website. Item number 5, public consultation. We have speakers on item 6, 7 and 8, Councillor Condacor, and on items 6 and 7, Michelle Condacor. Item number 6, the Employee Code of Conduct, recommended changes by the external auditor. I shall hand over to Wahida, the Monitoring Officer, to take us through the report.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, this report is being presented to the committee from the Constitution Review Working Party with the recommended changes. So on the 31st of January this year, the committee received the External Auditor's Annual Report for the financial year 2020-2021. As part of that report, they reviewed the governance arrangements for managing gifts and hospitality and conflicts of interest for employees. One of the recommendations of the report for improvement was that the council prepare and maintain a register of interests for directors, assistant directors, senior managers. Currently, this is maintained locally within the service areas and the reports are made to the line managers direct. To give effect to this recommendation, Chair, it's been necessary to amend the Employee Code of Conduct. Trade unions have been consulted and there was no comments received from them. And the changes are as highlighted in Appendix A, which is attached to the report. Generally, so in brief, the changes relate to recording officers, conflicts of interest for transparency, and they require publication on the council's website. Chair, if the recommendation is as set out at paragraph 2 of the report, which is to approve the amendments and for it to be referred to council for acceptance and amendment of the Constitution.
Councillor Condacor, would you like to go first or would you like Michelle to?
I don't mind. I'll go first. Sorry, it's working now. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't want to say a lot on the employee issues, but there are a couple of things to raise. One is political impartiality and all that area, because we do have areas where the council may wish to close a service, as we had with the Civic Hall. And it's important that these restrictions do not stop employees getting involved in saving their service areas. So, yeah, it would be totally wrong for some employees to have a vote Labour, vote Tory, or even a vote Green sticker, I suppose, on their car while they're doing council work. But there does need to be a separation between their private life and their council life. And if their employment is at risk, I think it is reasonable that a sticker saying save the Civic Hall or something might be appropriate if you worked on the Civic Hall. The other interesting thing I notice is the improved transparency and the bits about secret societies and things. And that seems a good idea, but some staff will have joined the authority knowing that that will actually been expected to be kept secret. So unless they're in a role where that actually causes a problem, yeah, things like the monitoring officers and those sort of roles, you expect it to be a problem. But if our bin men are in the Freemasons, I frankly don't care. And yeah, so I do think we need to get the levels of those right. And the final thing that just concerned me was this change about monitoring officers and being able to tell staff, I think it's on page 20, where complaint against a member, it happens, that the monitoring officer can tell effectively the member of staff what they're required to do. And I wouldn't want that to go as far as the monitoring officer to tell a member of staff they've got to do something that would be counter to my interests. Thank you, Chair.
Does anybody have any points of clarification? Mrs. Condicourt.
Thank you. Well, I wasn't really going to comment on the actual content of the thing so much as to suggest that these things need rather better proofreading before they go on the website. Some of the spelling errors or typos that were on the version I read on the website have actually been corrected. There was plenty of places where it was councillor with one L, which I think is the American version. But just reading through, I have picked up a couple of errors and things. So I don't know whose responsibility that is, but it would be good if they were corrected. For example, it says polices rather than policies, and there's a the left out in the whistleblowing bit. There are probably other bits, but obviously I didn't have a... If I'd read this at home, I would have filled out things, but I read it online, so I haven't got all the corrections. But just a comment, really, for future. Thank you.
Just one very minor point here, paragraph 3.1. Since the minutes of this meeting will be looked at the next meeting, I just point out that directs in the second to last line of that paragraph should be directors, I think. Let's make sure we get that right before we have an argument over typos at the next meeting.
Noted. I think if you read the next part, it's assistant directors, so I think, yeah, we just need to make sure that we read through it and make sure they're better. Any further questions? In that case then, can I take a vote? All those in favour that we pass this to council? That's passed unanimous. Moving on, item number 7. Recommendations from the Constitution Review Working Party. Again, I shall hand over to the Monitoring Officer, Wahida, to give us the report.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, this report is coming back to the committee. It was previously considered on the 14th of March this year. And overall, I think the committee was in agreement with the majority of the amendments that are proposed in the report. You'll see it's a consolidated report, and it covers several changes within the Constitution. Chair, if I just go through briefly the changes and summarise them. they are attached in the appendices. But just to confirm, the first one is in relation to the role and description for borough councillors. This is set out in Part 5E of the Constitution, and the changes are to effectively ensure the expectations of the council from its members are met. It emphasises the importance of ward members to represent their communities, the importance of reading and understanding reports at meetings, and the importance of attendance at training sessions to keep up to date with developments. Chair, would you like me to go through all of them, and then are you happy to discuss all of them together, or would you like each one?
I think you just give us a brief overview of what's in there.
Okay.
And then if members have got any particular points from reading it, they'll pick them up.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Chair, the second one is in relation to the delegations of the Assistant Director of Planning. Again, the proposed changes are highlighted in the appendix attached, Appendix B attached to the report. They relate to the public call-in requirements. That's the first revised change, and they are based upon current draft fee proposals currently under the consultation by the government. The second is in relation to the scheme being amended to make it clear that it's the chair, that where it states that it's the chair to be consulted on the matter, that will also include the vice chair as well as the chair. The final amendment to the delegations arises from a matter that emerged recently regarding deferral of items. Chair, at present, the planning committee is the only place where matters can be deferred, and there's no provision within there for a scheme for the for deferrals to be made by the assistant director. So the scheme's been considered by the Constitution Review Working Party, and it's been amended to allow the assistant director to be able to do this in consultation again with the chair and vice chair of the Planning Applications Committee. The reasoning behind this is sometimes deferrals might be straightforward. It may be because they require statutory consultees to attend the meeting who are not available, etc. And then to go ahead to hold a meeting, call all the parties to it for the deferral can be a bit inconvenient and a waste of time sometimes. So it's easier to maybe in those circumstances defer matters by delegation. Chair, the third set of proposals is to the Planning Code of Practice. This is particularly in relation to paragraph 5D.6, which deals with public speaking at planning committees. The changes are in relation to the priority of speakers. Up till now, the procedure is that it's on a first-come, first-served basis. This doesn't give opportunity for local residents sometimes who are directly affected or impacted by the proposals being put forward to then have their say. So the changes are to change the priority to speakers who may be directly affected by the proposals as opposed to interested parties. Obviously, there is the changes do allow, if there are vacant slots, then there will be interested parties will be allowed to speak on the matter. The other change relates to the number of public speakers. This was also considered by the Working Party to allow the chair the discretion to allow additional speakers. Because of the issues that this may give rise to in terms of allowing this to happen early on, in terms of Is it not on? Sorry, it must have gone off. Oh, sorry. Chair, the petition scheme amendment, I think this was also agreed at the last committee. It's just it wasn't formalised in the minutes, so it is back. So, as you will recall, we changed to the council's e-petition software. So we now have our own software set up for the petition scheme, and therefore the reference to change.org needs to be removed as the council no longer uses that system for petitions. The final petition, the other one is in relation to the members' code of conduct. We've got two changes there. One is in relation to the complaints process and hearings procedure. This was amended quite recently. However, there have been some complaints that have come through where it's quite clear that the code isn't engaged, and to give that flexibility to the monitoring officer, it's proposed that in consultation with the chair, with yourself as chair, that the monitoring officer be allowed to reject certain complaints which don't engage the members' code without having to take them to assessment subcommittee. Clearly, if there was ever any, if a complaint was arguably on the borderline, then that would be referred to the assessment subcommittee. The other changes to the complaints and hearing procedure is to the hearing procedure itself. It's basically it's been updated, and the proposed changes are shown at Appendix D. It's a simplified procedure, and it follows the procedures followed by appeals committees, etc., by the council. The final changes are to public participation. That's Part 5M of the Constitution, and this has been, the changes proposed are to manage public expectation and to reinforce the role of the chair. It's proposed that the wording on the agendas, the chair's brief, and the paragraph referred to at 5M be agreed on the basis that that will help to achieve that end result, Chair. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Mrs. Condicore.
Thank you. There are a few bits I want to pick up on. One is the criteria for letters of objection in the changes on the planning thing. I'm particularly concerned about number 1. For an objection to be valid, it should be a letter or email from a single household. Multiple letters from one property address shall be treated as a single objection. That I find extremely wrong. I am a completely individual person to my husband. I have views on things. We don't consult each other on absolutely everything. I don't know half the time whether he's put in an objection or whatever and things. So I think that's very concerning. And also, you know, I've lived in shared houses, not houses of multiple occupancy, when I was younger. And, you know, we were 3 people sharing a house who had no relationship to each other other than becoming friends as a result of living in the same house. And by this ruling, we would be all lumped together as one objection, even though we were absolutely 3 individuals. So I find that very concerning. I'm also concerned about the sort of increase in the number of valid objections required, particularly on the 10 to 50 dwellings. The larger ones, I think it's no problem to get 15 valid objections. But by virtue of this, it could be for 11 dwellings, and you'd need at least 10 valid objections. And particularly if it's on the edge of the borough, it might be quite difficult to get the right number of people. So people, you know, a small development in a well-populated area is going to be treated the same as a large development in a much less populated area, and you know, people aren't going to get equal representation on that. So I'm very concerned about that. I have concerns about the thing on the role of the councillors. Be an advocate for your ward. Well, primarily it's the ward, and then it's the town, and then it's the borough and things. And things do not happen purely on a ward basis. Our local park is actually in the next ward. The boundary between the two wards is our back hedge. So we have a lot to do with both wards. Town centre is very, very important to a lot of people, and it's not just the people that live in Abbey Ward where the town centre is. And you've also got Twin Hatters who are representing, you know, areas which have completely different boundaries and things. And people do not know whether it's a county thing or a borough thing. So if someone was a borough councillor but that bit didn't come under their county council but didn't come under their borough ward, they'd be able to do absolutely nothing. So that is, you know, I think it should remain as local residents. Obviously, you can't have people, you know, saying things for all over the place, but it really is quite a concern. And also then on the about the complaints, I think the complainant should be told when it's going to the subcommittee, because the subject of the complaint can go and speak to the subcommittee and give their view, but the person who's put the complaint in has absolutely no chance to give their side of the story. And I've had a number of complaints which have been dismissed, and I can't believe that they have been dismissed, because in my eyes it's been a blatant, you know, break of the code of conduct. And so, you know, I'm quite upset that I wasn't given the opportunity to come to the subcommittee and say, this is the reason I've put in the complaint, this is my version of events, and hear what the other person is. Because I have never been contacted about any complaints I have put in about different people at different points in time. I have only ever, at the end of the end of the thing, saying, oh, it wasn't found, we're not taking any further action. I've never had any, you know, contact other than, oh yes, we've received your complaint, and the next thing it's been dismissed. And I've never had any opportunity to speak, so I think that needs to be dealt with. Thank you.
Just one thing I'm going to say on the number of objections. You are still remembering that a ward member can call in an application. We haven't removed that from, we haven't removed it from here. A ward member is still entitled to call in an application, but he just needs his 3 members to call it in. It's still in the Constitution. Councillor Condicle.
It is appalling how the residents have been disenfranchised by a lot of these changes. The changes on the number of objections and that stuff, absolutely appalling. If 5 people want to object, something should go to a planning committee. Planning committees still turn down applications. It just means they've actually got a better chance of stating their point. And 90, 95, some large percentage of applications never go to the planning committee. So I do not see that we have an unreasonable number of applications going to planning committee at the moment. And all you're doing by putting barriers up is actually causing people to go around, knock doors, and then just try and defeat the system. And they're wasting their time to get what they already had the ability to do. We're disenfranchising residents, particularly when you start saying electors rather than residents. Because, I mean, you had some Gurkhas live in Weddington for a while. They, I don't think, are actually electors, but they actually are still really important residents, as are people who are under 18. I think residents is a good phrase, not electors. I look after everyone I can. I even look after people on the other side of the St Nicholas Park Drive, because if they've got a problem that I can help, they may be out my ward, but they're important. And the changes to the hearing procedures are absolutely appalling. In the standards hearing, there is no one in that room looking after me. We had, at one point, the monitoring officer and the investigating officer. Now we seem to be lumping it all together, that the monitoring officer is prosecuting the case, and we haven't got another officer there, and there's no legal representation. And it said like the appeals panel, but the appeals panel is a second stage of judgment. What the disciplinary panel is it's the only place the case is heard. And if the process is so unfair, if there is no one in that room, that it's even going to give me the shadow of doubt that I might, possibility I might be innocent and a reasonable, decent person, then why would anyone take part in a standards hearing? Just making the standards process have no one in the room to look after me means that I'm bullied more. I have no ability to ask for legal advice as to what is legal or not, because the person who I might ask is the same person doing the prosecution. Yeah, we need to actually have someone in that room to actually make sure the process isn't dangerous, actually, to the mental well-being of those that get subjected to it. And I would call on the council to have a fair system of hearings where there is someone looking after the victim. And by that, I mean the person accused. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody have any points for clarification? In that case, then, the recommendation is that we accept this report and it be recommended to council. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Brown? Councillor Downs, you happy to second that? Do we have any questions? Councillor Phillips.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's just a case of where do we go from here if we disagree with something. I find it very hard listening to the public speaking there, the councillor speaking, that I tend to agree with the valid objection, needing 10 valid objections for a planning application between 10 and 50 dwellings. And I also have concerns about the process of one objection, one house. So I don't know where I go with that, or just vote against it.
I mean, the Constitution Working Party is a cross-party group, and we did have lots of discussions around this particular matter, but we felt this was the fairest way of doing it. And to be fair, it was agreeable to everybody. We looked at how we could do it, and with the one objection per household, the Constitution currently means that if you are of 5 years of age and living in a house, you can legally, as it stands at the minute, object to a planning application. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to make it so. And I get the point about shared occupancy, because we were looking at how you do it. So if the house is officially a shared occupancy, then that doesn't mean that it's going to do it. But houses of multiple residents, house of multiple occupancy, we've been looking at all the different ways that we can incorporate it. So, but if you live in a house with 3 friends, I'm sure you would have had a conversation about the planning application that's going to happen next door to you. So at that point, I don't see where the issue is from one letter from the house, because everybody in the house, if 2 people agree, they're going to have the same objection. If a third person doesn't object to the application, they're not going to want to put in an objection to it. So I think if you do it that way, it's fair. And also, on the back of it, there is the member calling. And the member calling is there. Members are going to have to talk to, like you said, it's down to talking to residents. 3 party members. But, well, you have 2, but then I've heard it said before from the chair of planning, and I've also heard it said in the Constitution Working Party group by Councillor Shepherd, the Vice Chair of Planning, that if a member is struggling to get a third person to sign a call-in, they will look at it for them. So I don't think there's anything to be worried about by the raising of the objections. I think it just means that anything that comes before the committee will actually be a genuine reason to call it. And I think Maria wants to come in here as well.
Thank you, Chair. It was only to add, obviously, one of the reasons this was being looked at, as you quite rightly said, was members of Planning Applications Committee were sometimes getting frustrated that with some of the applications and what little input they could have on that. And as you said, this was about ensuring that the right things went in front of members and could have an impact on the decisions being made.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments? Councillor Vetrovic.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I've sat and listened to a lot of what's been said, and there's some interesting points that have come out. And just to pick up on a few of the things, I'll start with my own sort of general thoughts on what I've seen and what I've heard. First of all, deferral of planning. I'm very pleased that we've got that in. We've had, recently a number of things come in front of planning where we really need to speak to highways officers. We've got other ones coming up where we've asked to speak to children's services as well. So to actually have the opportunity to council meeting and not to waste people's time, whether that's officers, councillors, or most importantly of all, members of the general public, we don't want them really turning up only to then 5 minutes later adjourn the meeting because we haven't got the right people. So to actually be able to do that beforehand, I really welcome that, and I think well played by the members of the subcommittee that put that together. In terms of changes of priority of speakers, again, I'm very happy with that. Listen to what Mrs. Condacor's got. I kind of get the point that you are trying to make, but also what happens if you then got a situation where you've got several people, all adults living in there, two of them think one way and are putting a letter in. What about if the other person then wants to put a letter in and they perhaps disagree with that point of view and want to go, do we have something there if we get that, or are we saying that everybody is only just allowed that one view? So what happens if there is a discrepancy in the viewpoint between members of that household of multiple occupants? I know it's not a house of multiple occupancy, they're two different. Is there any comeback on that, or are they allowed to submit two separate statements then, one for and one against?
Objection.
Yeah, is it just for an objection? Yeah, it's just for an objection. So if there is if somebody in the house is in supportive of it, there's no reason why they can't write a letter of support in. This is pure. The change is purely to deal with an objection. So as I said, like you say, if two people in the house are objecting, they will hopefully write the same letters as when they're coming to speak, because only 3 people can speak at committee. You would think they'd sit down and write the same, put their points together and make one speech.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying on that point. And then the other one is the number of speakers. This is one I am slightly disappointed on. I was hoping that the bar would be set higher than 3 speakers on some of our larger items. I appreciate most of the time for planning we get 1, sometimes we get 2. But as we saw sort of last week, we did have one of the items where we had 3 people who wanted to speak, and they weren't allowed. In fact, I think there was 4, and we allowed 3 of them to speak. And it would just be nice if we could just up that on some of the ones that have had a larger number of objections. I still think that we do need to listen to residents as much as we can. We sort of talk about a level playing field, but we also forget that planners, will bombard councillors beforehand, with emails and messages and documents. So I don't feel they're too hard done by. But obviously, if we want to extend that way as well, I'd be more than happy to as well. But I'm just conscious that where we've got these really large, numbers of objectors, we need to make sure we have a good representative sample. Again, welcoming the fact that we're going to local people first of all, and that we're not sort of just allowing people from 5 or 6 miles away who perhaps don't have direct links to speak, whereas residents who live 50 metres down the road don't. So very pleased that we've got that in. So I mean, okay, I've got one grumble essentially, and that's just for number 3. Everything else I'm sort of fairly happy with. And just to reiterate to Councillor Condacor and Mrs. Condacor, as the chair rightly said, I have put the offer out there that if you have something where you want to call it in and you are struggling, I'm always happy. I'm sure Councillor Shepherd as Vice Chair would be happy as well to add our signatures to it, as long as it's a reasonable request. Obviously, what we don't want is every single item on the agenda being called in, every single item in planning for the week being called forward, because that really would be a waste of our time. But, if there's something genuinely there, I'm more than happy to sit down and look through it with you, Councillor Condacor, and, more than likely give it my approval. So if you do need it, and also your ward colleagues as well. It doesn't always have to be Green Party, which you stated, or Blue Party, or Red Party. We can work on these things in a non-political way as well. And I'd encourage you to build those bridges with your colleagues from other parties as well. Thank you.
Before I bring you in, Councillor Brown, Maria just wants to come in on this point.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make the point, obviously I'm really happy as well that we are looking to increase the number, because I do think, you know, when you look at other authorities, allowing 2 speakers is actually quite low. The only word of caution I would have in terms of increasing speakers beyond 3, it is something that we would have to do in advance of the meeting to make sure all parties are aware. I'm only saying that, I'm not wanting to be negative, but I just need to ensure that after we've gone through all that effort in terms of considering an application, members considering it at committee, we aren't challenged on the process. And to be honest, challenges on the planning process are quite commonplace and can be, can be costly. So again, if we go down that route of increasing numbers, we would have to do it in advance of the meeting, and obviously there's the logistics involved in that.
We did actually spend quite a lot of time discussing that point as to how we could do it, and I think it was felt that 3 either side was probably the fairest way of doing it, but we can always review, we can always have a look at it in 6 months' time or so, and if there's anything that we think needs changing. Councillor Brown. Yeah.
I would welcome that. Yeah, I'd welcome see a review in 12 months' time of that, just to see where we are and to see that it has been effective for us. I think maybe 6 months isn't quite long enough, but I think in a 12-month cycle, you normally get to see pretty much everything that you're going to see. So yeah, I would welcome that review, and I don't know if we can schedule that in at some point as something to look at in sort of a year's time. Thank you.
I think we could look at see if it's worked increasing the number of speakers. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. The other points that I was going to make have been really well covered already, but one request really in respect of Appendix H, which is the guidance for speakers at meetings. Could I just suggest that the contents of paragraphs 5.4 and 5.5, that we add a précis of those points to our website in the section that's marked public participation at meetings. We already have a section there that says that the public are welcome to come along and speak at meetings. But perhaps if we gave some guidance as to how we expect people to behave, then we can preempt the fact that people come along ill-informed as to what's expected of them. And we've put it out there that the public are pre-warned that they need to stay on topic and not indulge in mudslinging, perhaps. I think it may be even an idea to read it out as part of the preliminaries of the meeting.
Just on that point, that those 2 paragraphs are actually going to be on the front of every council agenda for moving forward once this is accepted. So they will be. It'll be up to the chair whether he wants to read them out in full or what, but they will be read out at the start of meetings, as you say, to give the people, public speakers, an expectation of what we expect them to speak. Councillor Kenner.
Thank you, Chair. You've made my point for me. I was going to suggest putting these points on the agenda. So if I may even put them in the part where it explains points of order, points of personal explanation, public participation at meetings. I think that's just a nice place where it slots in, so the chairs of meetings don't have to read it out every single time. It's there on page 2 of every agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Phillips.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. This is, so members, this is the work programme for the forthcoming current financial year. This is the usual report that comes to this committee at roughly this time of year, and I will note that in Appendix A you've got the work programme itself split up into the audit provision and then the standards provision, and we've set out there when we believe we'll be able to report to this committee for those particular agenda items. There may be some slippage or some are brought forward. We'll see how we go through the year depending on how those audits go and the standards elements go, but that gives you an idea as to when to expect certain meetings to have certain agenda items. As I say, usual items on there. The only two new ones that you may notice in the standards section on the last two rows relate to the forthcoming borough election, and then obviously any training for members for following the election period. So, Chair, happy for that to be recommended as per the report, and also just to make members aware that in Appendix B you've got the extract from the Constitution itself about the expectations of the panel on this committee and what the responsibilities are covered within your remit as a panel. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Condicourt, I believe you wish to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I've been speaking as council for 18 years. I started in 2005, and one of the really important things I've always spoken about is Treasury. I spoke here in 2008 at the Cabinet when the council put £3 million into an Icelandic bank account. And sadly in those days things weren't videoed. I'm very concerned about Treasury, particularly with base rates really shooting up. 5% for the government rate, heading for 7% for people's mortgages. And I really am frightened that this council is borrowing large amounts of money to do really stupid things like build a cinema, just as cinemas are going out of business like nobody's business. On the work programme, there is very little checks and balances to see where we're going. The most important thing would be the Treasury management, which you put down for, let's look, January next year. Surely, with interest rates such a radical change, we've gone from 2% to 5%, not discussing the Treasury management aspects, how we're going to borrow all the money for these stupid amounts of projects at stupid base rates. We need to discuss Treasury. So many councils are now going into financial meltdown. They're being served Section 114 notices, and when I asked about the borrowing for these new projects, we're told we don't borrow or even think about borrowing until a project's ready to be going ahead. So we haven't started the cinema yet, we haven't started the multi-storey car park yet, we haven't started the museum yet. All these projects will need borrowing, and we urgently need a meeting of this audit committee or some scrutiny meeting to actually look at all the borrowing for these projects and the business cases to make sure the business cases work with the current interest rates. So I've got it on video. If it all goes pear-shaped in 6 months' time or a year's time you can't borrow the money, I told you, interest rates are rising, councils are going broke. A cinema is a stupid idea.
Any points of clarification from anybody? The recommendation... Councillor Kovacevic.
I take slight umbrage, actually, and I'd like to Councillor Condecourt to explain why a cinema is a stupid idea when they have multi-uses. They can't just be used as cinemas, they can actually be used for other things as well. And if you look at most of the ones that are really successful, they've branched out, they do things like comedy nights, they do entertainment nights and things like that. So it's not just a cinema, okay? You're talking about a community asset. So can you explain to me why, for example, that in your mind is stupid, whereas cycle paths, which are used by hardly anyone, are a great and a wonderful thing? So I'd really like to hear this, because, you know, as a councillor, I don't think you should be saying things are stupid. You may not like them personally, but to actually just use the word stupid outright, I think that's inappropriate of you as a man in your position, Councillor Condecourt.
The business case for a cinema is very dubious at the moment, and doing one in Nuneaton, which we've got a report from Warwickshire County Council, which actually studied how many cinema screens each of the towns needed, and we're fully provided with cinema screens. The report, it's online, tells us how much cinema screenage we need in each of the different areas of Warwickshire. With cinemas in Hinckley and at Bermuda Park, we're fully provided with cinema screens at the commercial level. If you're then going to niche cinemas, which are smaller, which is probably slightly smaller than what we're building, there's a niche market, and that niche market tends to be in affluent areas, the Lichfields and various places like that, the Solihull. The key thing is it's the business case. It's got to be sensible for a large number of years, and we will probably give a cinema a year's rent free and then expect to recruit that over years. We are not looking at the business case. So I think it is right to say that is what is normal. Chair. Chair. Chair, bring the business case for the cinema to this committee in closed session and let the committee, even me not here, just go through the finances and see if it's ties in with me being silly or actually it is a bit risky.
Yeah, it's interesting, Chair. Some people said vinyl was going out of fashion at one point, and what's happened there? So, you know, to say cinemas, people are always going to want these multimedia centres, and you've got to think in the wider context, Councillor.
Matt, you wanted to come in? Mrs. Condecourt.
Thanks, Chair. Just to wanted to clarify for the committee that obviously the Cabinet do get financial reports as well. And obviously the purpose of this is to give a 6-month, or in terms of this work programme, is to give a 6-month report into the current financial year for the Treasury management of the authorities. Just wanted to provide that clarification. And obviously secondly, there's obviously, as Councillor Condecourt has confirmed, there's obviously opportunities for OSP panels to also call in any particular project as well. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, and I think it would make sense. It makes sense to me to look at something in January where we know when things have settled down a little bit and we know where we sit, rather than to jump straight in now. So, Councillor Condecourt, if you want to investigate the cinema business case, you know how to do it. It's called a work programme suggestion. It will go to the relevant OSP, whether that be finance or whether that be the business committee. And I'm sure, as the chair of the finance committee is here tonight, if the work programme suggestion is acceptable, I'm sure he would look at it. So, do we have a proposer for the recommendations? Councillor Keller. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Hartshorn. Any questions? Councillor Downs.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a bit of concern, actually, with what's going on at the moment, because, and I know this is going to sound a lot of Bedworthian, but we shut the Civic Hall last year, and now we're building a multiplex cinema in Nuneaton. I don't understand it, I'm sorry. Why should we borrow tens of millions of pounds to build a multi-screen cinema when we've got something that can do the job. It's just me, sorry, but I know it's a bit off track, but I know. I do think, though, we need to keep a closer eye on the financials, Chair, to be honest with you, because there's a lot of people here. I'm a mortgage payer, and I think we should make it a bit sooner than, you know, January, possibly November, and then look at it again in February. I'm just thinking shorten that gap a little bit, Chair, that's all. Yeah, I know. Okay.